The spotlights were so bright they felt hot on my skin, and the suit a rental that smelled faintly of chemicals, and someone else's ambition was tight across my shoulders. My son Ethan stood on a stage bathed in a soft blue glow, holding a glass microphone like it was a scepter. He had that smile on his face, the one he'd perfected for investors and magazines, the one that never quite reached his eyes. And then he said it, his voice echoing through a ballroom of Austin's tech royalty. $10,000 a month, he announced, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on me. That's the stipend I give my dad, my hero, so he can finally rest after a lifetime of running into fires for people like us. The room erupted, polite, wealthy applause that sounded like expensive rain. Admiring smiles turned in my direction, and I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, pinning me to my seat. I was supposed to smile, to nod, to look like the grateful patriarch of a tech dynasty, but I was frozen. $10,000. That number hung in the air, shimmering under the crystal chandeliers, a beautiful, perfect lie. My reality was a third-floor walk-up in Baltimore with plumbing that groaned like a dying man. My reality was the burn of icy hot on my knuckles after a 10-hour handyman shift, wrestling a water heater into a rich woman's basement. My reality was a 15-year-old pickup truck whose heater only worked in July and whose gas gauge was a permanent resident on empty. I'd eaten a gas station hot dog for dinner 2 nights ago just to stretch my budget until the next check cleared. But here, in this room that smelled of perfume and money, I was a prop. A story my son told to polish his own halo. Ethan's hand found my shoulder and squeezed, a gesture of feigned affection that felt more like a warning. The applause was loud, but the silence roaring in my ears was deafening. At 62, you learn that the deepest burns don't come from flames. They come from the people you once carried out of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment with your first impression of Ethan and Claire. I'd love to know what you think. The truth is, I didn't belong in that ballroom. Not with the waiters who moved like ghosts and the art on the walls that cost more than my house ever did. My hands, scrubbed raw but still etched with the ghosts of rust and grime, felt clumsy holding the heavy water glass. My name is Frank Miller. For 35 years, that name meant something on the streets of Baltimore. It was stitched over the pocket of a soot-stained uniform. It meant I was the guy running in when everyone else was running out. It meant a firm hand on a scared kid's shoulder and a promise to a panicked mother that we'd do everything we could. Now it seemed my name was just another asset in my son's portfolio, a line item under brand enhancement. I watched Ethan bask in the glow of the applause, his wife Claire at his side, looking every bit the part of the supportive, elegant partner. She tilted her champagne flute in my direction, her smile as sharp and perfect as a shard of glass. There was no warmth in her eyes, just a glint of triumph. It was a look that said she knew. She knew about my leaking faucet, my threadbare bank account, my aching back, and she was daring me to shatter the illusion. She was the architect of this lie. I could feel it in my bones. She wore her wealth like armor, and this little performance was just another part of her strategy. I forced my lips into a shape that might have passed for a proud smile, but my heart was a hammering drum against my ribs. I said nothing, because in a room like that, silence is a shield. It meant I could maybe, just maybe, walk out with a single shred of my dignity still intact. But I was beginning to realize that my dignity hadn't been invited tonight, only its ghost was. The evening had started with a handshake that felt like a business transaction. Ethan had met me at the entrance to the ballroom, a vast space dripping with so much crystal and light it made my eyes ache. He wasn't alone. Claire was attached to his arm, a vision in a dark blue dress that probably cost more than my truck. "Dad, you made it," Ethan said, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. It wasn't a greeting, it was a performance for the benefit of a photographer hovering nearby. He pulled me into a quick, stiff hug that smelled of expensive cologne and something sterile, like a hospital waiting room. "You look great. The suit fits perfectly." It was a lie, and we both knew it. The sleeves were a half-inch too short, and the fabric felt like cardboard against my skin, a constant reminder that I was wearing a costume. Claire offered me a smile that was all teeth. "Frank, so glad you could be here. We saved you a wonderful seat." Her voice was smooth and low, the kind of voice that could deliver a compliment and a dismissal in the same breath. She gestured to a table near the back, far from the main stage where they would be sitting. It was a table for the B-list, the distant relatives and junior partners, the people who were meant to witness the spectacle, not be a part of it. I was a set piece, positioned just right so the audience could see me, the humble, heroic origin story of the great Ethan Miller. I spent the next hour navigating a sea of strangers, who all seemed to speak a language I didn't understand. They talked about seed rounds and scalability, about disruption and monetization. They held their wine glasses with a casual ease I couldn't mimic, their laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged room. A young man with a sharp haircut and no socks asked me what I did. I told him I was a retired firefighter. He blinked, processed it for a second, and then said, "Oh, that's so noble," before turning away to find someone more important. I felt like a museum exhibit, the American working man, circa 1990. Look, but don't touch. Ethan and Claire made their rounds, a king and queen surveying their court. A few times Ethan would catch my eye from across the room and give me a thumbs up as if to say, "See, Dad? This is what all those extra shifts bought." He wasn't wrong. I'd worked double time for years, missing birthdays and holidays, my body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep. Also, he could go to the best schools, so he would never have to worry the way I did. I'd mortgaged my future for his, and standing there, I felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with something new and unsettling. It was the feeling of having built a beautiful, towering structure, only to find there was no room for you inside. When the time came for the speeches, a hush fell over the room. Ethan took the stage, and the story of his success unfolded on two massive screens behind him. Graphs shot upwards, logos flashed, and pictures of him shaking hands with smiling, powerful people filled the space. He was charming, of course. He'd always had that gift. He could sell water to a drowning man. He talked about innovation and vision, about changing the world one algorithm at a time. And then he turned his attention to me. "But none of this," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of practiced sincerity, "would be possible without the foundation I was given. My father, Frank Miller, is here tonight." He pointed me out, and a spotlight swung in my direction, blinding me for a second. "He's a man who spent his life running into burning buildings, a true American hero." The room dutifully applauded. My hands felt like lead weights in my lap. This was the part of the story he liked to tell, the gritty, noble backstory that made his own clean-handed success seem all the more impressive. And then came the moment that shattered the evening, the moment that replayed in my head for weeks like a broken record. "To honor that sacrifice," Ethan continued, his smile broadening, "I'm proud to provide him with a $10,000 a month retirement stipend, so he can finally rest after a lifetime of running into fires for people like us." And that's when it happened. The applause, the sea of smiling faces turning to me, the weight of their admiration for a man who didn't exist. My son hadn't just told a lie. He had stolen my life, my struggles, my reality, and replaced it with a story that served him. He had taken 35 years of soot and sweat and fear and turned it into a cheap marketing slogan. As he walked back to his table, the applause washing over him, he paused by my chair. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "Just go with it, Dad. It's good for everyone." It wasn't a request, it was an order. I sat there, frozen in the spotlight, a monument to a lie, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the familiar, terrifying heat of a fire I had no idea how to put out. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow congratulations. People I didn't know came up to my table to shake my hand, their eyes shining with a kind of second-hand admiration. "Your son is a remarkable man," a woman in a shimmering dress told me. "You must be so proud." I just nodded, the words catching in my throat like ash. All I could think about was Ethan's whisper, "Just go with it." It wasn't just the lie, it was the casual, easy way he expected me to become his accomplice. It was the assumption that my reality, my actual life, was a small price to pay for his comfort. The prime rib on my plate went cold, untouched. Every bite felt like it would choke me. I needed to get out of there, but I knew I couldn't leave without looking Ethan in the eye, away from the spotlights and the applause. I finally found him near the grand exit, saying his goodbyes to a group of investors. He was laughing, his arm draped around Claire's shoulders. When he saw me approaching, his smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He excused himself and steered me toward a quiet alcove, away from the last lingering guests. The air here was cool, and the noise of the party was a distant murmur. "What's up, Dad? Did you have a good time?" he asked, already checking his watch. "A good time?" The words came out rougher than I intended. "Ethan, what was that? $10,000? Where did you get a number like that?" He sighed, a puff of annoyed air, and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He wasn't looking at me, but at his reflection in the dark marble of the wall. Dad, relax. It's just optics, a branding thing. We're in the middle of a huge funding round, and it helps to have a good story, a narrative of family, of giving back. It looks good. It looks good? I could feel a tremor in my hands, a mix of rage and disbelief. It's a lie, Ethan. A lie you told on a stage in front of hundreds of people. You made my life into a commercial. It's not a lie. It's just creative accounting for the soul, he said with a small, dismissive shrug. Look, my financial guys are setting up a family trust. It's for tax efficiency. Technically, money is being allocated in your name for the family's benefit. You don't have to worry about the details. He finally turned to me, his expression a mask of strained patience. You, of all people, should understand sacrifice for the greater good. Just think of this as your contribution to the family's success. It costs you nothing. Costs me nothing. The words hit me harder than any physical blow. It cost me my dignity. It cost me my truth. But before I could find the words to tell him that, Claire appeared at his side, silent as a shadow. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "Everything okay, darling?" she asked, her eyes fixed on me. Ethan took the escape route she offered. "Yeah, we're fine. Dad was just a little confused about the finances." Claire's smile was thin, a bloodless line. "Of course, the numbers can be so tiresome." She waited until Ethan had turned back to his guests before she took a step closer to me. The scent of her perfume, something floral and cold, filled the small space. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound meant only for me. "Frank," she began, the name sounding like an insult on her tongue. "You have to understand, Ethan is building an empire. Empires are built on stories. And right now, you are a very important part of a very successful story." She let that hang in the air for a beat. I just stared at her, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. "Family is about stability," she continued, her gaze unwavering and hard as stone. "It's about everyone playing their part to protect what we've all built. It would be a terrible shame if someone decided to play a different part, a disruptive part." She straightened a wrinkle on her dress that wasn't there. "It would be unwise, for everyone." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat, delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the coldness of a snake. She was telling me, in no uncertain terms, to be quiet, to swallow the lie and live inside the story she had written for me, or face consequences I couldn't even imagine. She held my gaze for another long second, a silent challenge passing between us. Then, with another one of her perfect, empty smiles, she turned and glided back to her husband's side, leaving me alone in the marble alcove, the chill of her words seeping into my bones, colder and more permanent than the Baltimore winter I was flying home to. I don't remember saying goodbye. I think I just nodded to Ethan from across the lobby, a silent, empty gesture, and walked out of the hotel's grand entrance into the warm Texas night. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and exhaust fumes, did nothing to thaw the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Claire's words echoed in my head on a loop, unwise, disruptive. A terrible shame. It was the language of the mob, dressed up in a $10,000 gown. The valet brought my rental car around, a sterile silver sedan that felt as foreign as the suit I was wearing. Every part of this trip felt borrowed, like a life I was just trying on for size before returning it, damaged and ill-fitting, to the store. The flight back to Baltimore was a long, sleepless tunnel of recycled air and the low drone of the engines. I sat pressed against the cold glass of the window, watching the lights of cities slide by beneath the clouds, each one a universe of people living lives that were honest, at least. I thought about the men I'd worked with at the firehouse, guys who would literally walk through a wall of fire for you and never ask for a word of thanks. What would they think if they saw me now? A charity case in a story my own son had invented. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt like I'd spent my whole life putting out fires, only to come home and find my own house had been burned to the ground from the inside. Landing in Baltimore was like waking from a strange, suffocating dream. The air was damp and carried the familiar, briny scent of the harbor. It was real. The humidity, the gray sky, the grit on the sidewalks, it was all blessedly, painfully real. I took a shuttle to the long-term parking lot and found my old Ford pickup right where I'd left it. The driver's side door groaned in protest as I opened it, and the familiar scent of old coffee and sawdust filled my lungs. It was the smell of my actual life. When I turned the key, the engine coughed and sputtered before catching with a reluctant roar. I patted the cracked dashboard like an old friend. We were both just trying to keep running. The drive home took me through streets I knew like the back of my own scarred hands. Streets of brick row houses, their windows glowing with warm yellow light. Lives were happening in those houses. Real lives, with real struggles and small, honest victories. When I finally climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, the silence that greeted me was heavy. The place was clean, but worn. The armchair I'd had for 20 years was threadbare on the arms. The kitchen linoleum was peeling near the sink, and a faint smell of dampness lingered near the window. On the small kitchen table sat a neat stack of envelopes. The electric bill, a final notice from the water company, the credit card statement I'd been dreading. I picked them up, the paper flimsy in my hands. The total amount I owed was a pathetic fraction of the $10,000 my son had so proudly announced to the world. The injustice of it all, the sheer staggering arrogance, finally broke through the numbness. The despair was a flood, and for a long moment I let it wash over me. I sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of it all pressing me down. This was it. This was the part where I was supposed to play my role, the quiet, grateful old man who knew his place. But then, something else stirred. It was a familiar feeling, one I hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling I'd get standing outside a burning building, the heat on my face, the roar in my ears. It was the moment the fear gives way to something colder, something clearer. A quiet, unshakable resolve. I had run into fires my whole life. This was just a different kind of fire. I stood up, walked over to the old wooden bookcase in the living room, and pulled out a dusty, leather-bound book. It was an old station ledger, one I'd kept for tracking overtime shifts and expenses. Most of its pages were filled with the neat, blocky handwriting of a younger man. I flipped to the first clean page. I picked up a pen, the cheap ballpoint kind that always seems to work. My hand was perfectly steady. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then, underneath it, I wrote the 2 words that would become my new foundation, my new map out of the smoke. 10,000? The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, the question I'd written in the ledger still burning behind my eyes. 10,000? It wasn't just a number, it was a door. And I had to find out what was on the other side. For years, my life had been about reacting to the sound of a bell, to the smell of smoke, to the demands of a broken pipe or a faulty wire. For the first time in a long time, I was going to act. My first call was the simplest. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the ledger open beside me, and dialed the 800 number on the back of my bank card. After navigating a maze of automated prompts, I finally got a real person on the line, a woman with a tired but patient voice. I explained that I was trying to track a recurring monthly deposit, a significant one, that should have been coming from my son's business account. I gave her the dates. I could hear the gentle clicking of her keyboard as she searched. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. "Sir," she said finally, her voice polite but firm, "I'm looking at your account history for the last 18 months. There are no recurring electronic transfers of that nature. Your only deposits are from your Social Security and 2 small, irregular direct deposits from a local contracting service." I knew it was the truth, but hearing it stated so plainly, so officially, sent a cold wave through me. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a clerical error, it was a complete fabrication. "Are you absolutely certain?" I asked, my voice quieter than I wanted. "Yes, Mr. Miller, I'm certain," she replied. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" I thanked her and hung up, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I picked up my pen and, next to the words, 10,000, I wrote in neat block letters, "Bank confirms, no deposits." The first fact. It was a small, bitter thing, but it was mine. I spent the rest of the day on a roofing job in a neighborhood not far from the old firehouse. The work was hard, my knees ached, and the sun beat down on my neck. But there was a comfort in the simple, honest labor. You find the leak, you patch the hole. The problem and the solution are right there in front of you. As I was packing up my tools, my old buddy from Station 12, Dave Riley, pulled up. He'd retired a few years after me and started a small private investigation business, mostly doing background checks and tracking down deadbeat dads. He leaned against his car, a grin on his face. "Frankie boy. Still playing with tar and shingles, I see. I thought your rich kid was supposed to have you set up on a beach somewhere." The casual remark landed like a punch. News of Ethan's generosity had apparently made its way through the firefighter grapevine. I just shook my head, forcing a weak smile. Something like that. Hey Dave, let me ask you something. If you wanted to find out what someone really owned, property, businesses, that sort of thing, where would you start? Dave's expression shifted, his investigator's curiosity kicking in. Depends. You trying to see if your new girlfriend is secretly a millionaire? Nothing like that, I said. Just curious. He thought for a moment. Easiest place to start is public records, property deeds, business registrations, LLC filings. It's all online these days if you know where to look. Most people, even the rich ones, get sloppy. They think no one's ever going to check. He gave me a long, searching look. You in some kind of trouble, Frank? Just tidying up my own accounts, I lied. But his words, they think no one's ever going to check, stuck with me. That evening, instead of going home, I drove to the public library. The place was quiet, filled with the soft rustle of turning pages and the low hum of computers. I hadn't used a computer for much more than paying bills in years. I sat down at a terminal, the screen bright in the dim light, and felt a wave of inadequacy wash over me. But the feeling was quickly replaced by the image of Claire's cold, challenging stare at the gala. I took a deep breath and started typing. I searched for Ethan Miller, Austin, Texas. A flood of articles about his company, his philanthropy, his vision for the future. It was all the same polished story I'd seen on the stage. Then I remembered what Dave had said about sloppiness. I started searching for property records, for business entities. It was a maze of city and state government websites, each one more confusing than the last. For an hour, I found nothing but dead ends. I was about to give up when I tried a new search, a simple one I hadn't thought of before. I typed in Claire Vance, her maiden name, and there it was, a single link to a Texas state business registry, an LLC named Vance Holdings. The registered agent was a law firm in Austin. My heart started beating faster. I clicked on another link, this one for Travis County property deeds, and my breath caught in my throat. Vance Holdings was listed as the sole owner of a luxury condominium in a new high-rise downtown. The purchase date was just 6 months ago, a cash sale, no mortgage. I stared at the screen, the words blurring for a second. This was it. This was the first thread. A name that wasn't Miller, a company I'd never heard of, a piece of property bought with cash. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't creative accounting. This was a system. It was a deliberate, carefully constructed maze designed to hide something. And for the first time since that humiliating night in Austin, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger or shame. It was hope, the kind of hope a firefighter feels when he finally finds a window in a smoke-filled room, a way in. The world outside the library had gone dark. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows on the pavement, but I barely noticed. The only light I could see was the one radiating from the computer screen, the crisp, undeniable black letters spelling out her name, Claire Vance. It was like finding a secret key to a room I never knew existed. For years, she had been Claire Miller, a name that connected her to my son, to me, to our family. But Claire Vance, that was someone else. That was a name that belonged to a life before us, a name she had kept alive in the shadows of legal documents, a ghost identity used to move money. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the tremor of adrenaline, the kind that hits after the immediate danger has passed and your body finally understands what just happened. I fumbled in my wallet and found the crumpled dollar bills I kept for emergencies. I fed them into the library's printing machine, my heart pounding with each whir and click as the pages slid out, warm to the touch. The business registration for Vance Holdings, the property deed for the downtown Austin condo. I held the papers in my hand. They felt solid, real. This wasn't a story in my head anymore. It wasn't a feeling of being wronged. It was evidence. The drive home was a quiet, contemplative blur. The familiar streets of Baltimore seemed different, as if I were seeing them with new eyes. I saw the peeling paint on the row houses, the tired-looking storefronts, the men waiting at the bus stop after a long shift. This was a world of scraped-together dignity, of lives lived on the narrow margins. And then there was this other world, the one on the paper sitting on the passenger seat, a world of cash-bought condos and anonymous LLCs, a world built on a lie that used my name as its foundation. The anger I'd felt at the gala had been a hot, blinding flash flood. This was different. This was a cold, slow-rising river. It was a calculated betrayal, a scheme so meticulously planned it made my head spin. Ethan's casual dismissal. It's just optics. Dad now seemed monstrous. He wasn't just lying to the public. He was a willing participant in a sophisticated fraud orchestrated by his wife, a fraud that used his own father as its cover story. The thought that my son would look me in the eye and lie with such ease was a deeper wound than any lie told on a stage. Back in my apartment, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't make dinner. I walked straight to the kitchen table and spread the printed documents out under the dim overhead light. They lay there like pieces of a map to a place I never wanted to visit. I picked up my pen and opened the ledger to that first, defiant page. Under the line, "Bank confirms. No deposits," I began to write, my handwriting steady and clear. LLC registered, Vance Holdings. Agent, Austin Law Firm. Property, luxury condo, downtown Austin. Owner, Vance Holdings. Cash purchase. I stared at the words. Each one was a nail hammered into the coffin of the story they had tried to sell me. I felt a grim, hollow sense of satisfaction. There was no joy in this, no triumphant surge. There was only the quiet, somber vindication of a man who knew he wasn't crazy. My memory wasn't failing. My bitterness hadn't invented a conspiracy. The truth was right here, in black and white, on a piece of paper that cost me $2.75 at a public library. The name was the key, Claire Vance. She had been careful, but not careful enough. Like Dave said, they think no one is ever going to check. They had looked at me, at the calloused hands and the tired eyes, and they had seen a simple old man, a relic from a bygone era who wouldn't know how to look, who wouldn't dare to question their sophisticated world. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken a lifetime of quiet endurance for weakness. That was their mistake. And as I sat there in the silence of my small apartment, the city humming its nightly tune outside my window, I knew that their mistake was about to become my greatest strength. I didn't know what my next step was, but I knew I couldn't walk it alone. This was no longer just about a lie. This was about the law. The documents sat on my table for 2 days, a silent testament to the lie. I'd look at them in the morning over coffee, and again at night before turning in. They were a comfort and a burden all at once. They were the truth, but they were a truth I didn't know how to wield. The world of LLCs and property deeds was as foreign to me as the surface of the moon. I knew how to navigate a smoke-filled hallway, not a legal labyrinth. I needed a guide, someone who spoke the language. But the thought of walking into a stranger's expensive law office, laying out this painful, embarrassing story, and handing over a check I couldn't afford, it felt like another form of defeat. Then, a name surfaced from the back of my mind, Sarah Jenkins. She was just a rookie when I was a captain at Station 12, a kid with bright, determined eyes and a spirit that wouldn't quit. She was sharp as a tack, but had a habit of overthinking things. I'd spent a few shifts teaching her how to trust her gut, how to read the smoke, how to stay calm when every instinct was screaming to run. She'd left the department after a bad knee injury a few years back and, last I heard, had put herself through school to become a paralegal. It took me a full day to work up the nerve to call. It felt like an admission of weakness, asking for help from someone I had once taught. But as I dialed her number, I realized it wasn't weakness, it was strategy. It was calling for backup. She answered on the second ring, her voice as warm and no-nonsense as I remembered. "Captain Miller? Wow. It's been a while. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Sarah. And it's just Frank now," I said, the words feeling a little stiff. "Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I was hoping I could buy you a cup of coffee. I've got a situation, some paperwork I could use a professional eye on." We met the next afternoon at a small diner halfway between my place and her office downtown. The place smelled of old coffee and frying onions, a comforting, familiar scent. Sarah slid into the booth opposite me, her smile genuine. She looked different in a crisp blouse and slacks, but her eyes were the same clear, direct, and intelligent. For a few minutes we just caught up, talking about old times at the station and guys we both knew. But the folder sitting on the vinyl seat beside me was a heavy, unspoken presence. Finally, I took a breath and slid it across the table. "This is what I wanted to show you," I said, my voice low. "It's a family matter." She opened the folder, and I watched her face as she read. She didn't say a word. She just took it all in the printouts of the business registration, the condo deed, the notes I had made in the ledger. I saw her eyes narrow slightly, her expression shifting from friendly curiosity to sharp, focused concentration. She was no longer just a kid I'd mentored. She was a professional, analyzing a problem. As she read, I told her the whole story, from the humiliating moment at the gala to Claire's veiled threat in the alcove. I laid it all out, the words tasting like rust in my mouth. When I finished, she slowly pushed the papers back into the folder and looked me straight in the eye. "Frank," she said, her voice firm, "this is more than a family matter. This is calculated. This is fraud." She tapped a finger on the folder, setting up an LLC under a maiden name, purchasing assets with cash through that entity, while your son publicly claims he's supporting you. This is a deliberate system designed to hide money and create a false narrative for tax and PR purposes. This is elder financial abuse, plain and simple. Hearing her say it, putting a legal name to the ugliness, was like a punch to the gut and a breath of fresh air all at once. It validated everything I had felt. "So, what do I do?" I asked, feeling a sliver of the weight on my chest begin to lift. "First," she said, leaning forward, "we get more. This is a great start, but a good lawyer will want to see a clear pattern. We need to connect the money Ethan claims he's giving you directly to this LLC." She paused, her mind clearly working. "The firm I work for specializes in corporate law, not this. But I know people, good people. Let me make a call. Find someone who knows how to fight this, someone who won't charge you a fortune to get started." She looked down at my calloused hands, then back at my face. "You taught me how to run into a fire, Captain. Let me show you how to handle the smoke." For the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. It wasn't just that she believed me, it was that she was ready to stand with me. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally, and for a man who had spent his life as part of a team, that was everything. Sarah was true to her word. 2 days after our meeting, she called with the name of a lawyer, a woman named Maria Flores, who specialized in elder law and had a reputation for being a bulldog in the courtroom. Sarah had already briefed her on the basics, and Miss Flores had agreed to a consultation, but she'd echoed Sarah's advice. The case was compelling, but it would be ironclad if we could find a direct, undeniable link. We needed something that explicitly connected the money Ethan claimed was for my support to Claire's secret company. The public records were the smoke, but we still needed to find the flame. And I knew there was only one place that flame would be burning, inside their house. The thought of going back to Austin made my stomach turn. It was their territory, their world. But the image of that ledger on my table, with its few spare lines of truth, gave me a grim resolve. I needed to get back into that house, not as a guest or a prop, but as an investigator. This was the part of the job I always hated: the deception. In the fire service, everything is about trust and transparency. You say what you're doing, and you do what you say. Now, I had to learn how to lie. I booked a cheap last-minute flight, telling Ethan I was coming because of a sudden, serious plumbing issue in my building that required me to vacate for a day or two. It was a flimsy excuse, but I peppered it with enough technical jargon about main water lines and potential foundation damage that it sounded plausible. To my surprise, Ethan didn't question it. "That's rough, Dad," he'd said over the phone, his voice distracted. "Yeah, of course, you can stay with us. I'll be at a tech conference for most of the day, but Elena will be there to let you in." He was so insulated by his own world that the details of mine were just inconvenient background noise. His lack of curiosity was the key that would unlock his own front door. Flying back into Austin felt different this time. I wasn't there for a performance. I was on a mission. The clear, dry heat that hit me as I stepped out of the airport felt less like a welcome and more like the oppressive warmth of a closing room. I took a cab directly to their house, a sprawling, modern structure of glass and white stone that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a home. Just as Ethan had promised, the housekeeper, Elena, opened the door. She was a small, quiet woman from El Salvador who had worked for them for years. I'd always seen a kindness in her eyes, a weariness that suggested she saw more than she ever spoke of. She seemed surprised to see me. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice soft. "Mr. Ethan said you were coming, but I did not expect you so soon." "My flight got in early," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "It's good to see you, Elena. I hope I'm not too much trouble." "Never, sir," she said, taking my small overnight bag. "You are family." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with an irony she couldn't possibly understand. As she led me inside, I asked her about her own family, her children back home. Her face softened as she spoke, a genuine warmth replacing her professional reserve. We stood in the cavernous, sun-drenched living room, and for a few minutes, we just talked like two real people. I didn't press her for information. I didn't ask her a single question about Ethan or Claire. Instead, I just listened. I saw the fatigue in her posture, the way her hands were never still, always wiping a stray bit of dust from a tabletop or straightening a cushion. I looked around at the pristine, impersonal space. It was a beautiful house, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a showroom, a stage set for a life, not the life itself. It must be a lot of work, keeping a place like this so perfect, I said quietly, my gaze meeting hers. She gave a small, sad smile. There is always something to clean, sir. She looked at me then, a flicker of something knowing in her dark eyes. I was sorry to hear about your troubles with the plumbing. It is a hard thing when your own home turns against you. Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. She was talking about more than pipes. She was a woman who understood what it felt like to be a small part of someone else's grand design. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between us. I wasn't asking her to betray her employers, and she wasn't offering to. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that if she saw an injustice, she would not turn a blind eye. I was just a quiet old man, worried about my own house, but I had planted a seed. Now, I just had to wait for Ethan to leave for his conference and hope I had a chance to find the proof I needed before Claire came home. The moral high ground felt miles away. I was in the trenches now, and the only way out was forward. An hour after I arrived, Ethan came downstairs, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that made him look more like a corporate raider than a tech visionary. He gave me a brief, distracted pat on the shoulder. "Gotta run, Dad. Big day. Make yourself at home. Elena will take care of you." He was out the door before I could muster a reply, the sleek, silent purr of his electric car fading down the long driveway. The house settled into a profound quiet, broken only by the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant, rhythmic sounds of Elena working in the kitchen. This was my chance. My heart was a heavy drum against my ribs as I walked down the long, gallery-like hallway toward Ethan's home office. Each step on the polished concrete floor felt unnaturally loud. This was wrong. Every instinct in my body, honed by a lifetime of following rules and respecting boundaries, was screaming at me. I was a guest in my son's home, acting like a thief. But then, the image of Claire's cold, threatening smile flashed in my mind, and it was enough to keep me moving forward. The office was exactly as I'd imagined it, minimalist, cold, and imposing. A massive glass desk faced a wall of windows that looked out onto a perfectly manicured garden. There were no family photos, no personal trinkets, just a sleek computer, a stack of files, and an air of sterile efficiency. It was the office of a man who didn't work here, but who performed the idea of work here. I took a steadying breath and started to look, my movements quick and deliberate. I knew I didn't have much time. Claire could return at any moment. I started with the filing cabinet. The drawers slid open with a whisper-quiet hiss. Everything was meticulously labeled: investments, payroll, Q3 projections. Nothing that looked personal. I moved to the desk, my eyes scanning the stack of folders. One was labeled simply household. My pulse quickened. I opened it. Inside were receipts for landscaping, pool maintenance, property taxes. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to close it when I noticed another folder tucked underneath it, its tab almost hidden. The label was deceptively simple: family expenses. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I lifted the folder. I opened it on the desk, and my breath caught. It wasn't filled with receipts for groceries or school supplies for the grandkids. It was a collection of financial statements, printed on crisp, heavy paper. At the top of the first page was the name I had discovered in the library: Vance Holdings, LLC. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I angled it to avoid the glare from the window, and started taking pictures, page after page. They were monthly summaries, and they told a story that made my blood run cold. Every single month for the past year, there was a line item showing an incoming wire transfer of exactly $10,000. And next to each transfer was a transaction code, a simple, damning set of initials: FM support, my support, Frank Miller support. The outrage was a hot, metallic taste in the back of my throat. This was it, the proof. The direct, undeniable link Sarah said we needed. But it was what I saw next that truly broke me. The rest of the statements detailed the outgoing payments from the Vance Holdings account. There was the monthly lease payment for Claire's Porsche. There were charges from a high-end designer boutique on South Congress Avenue totaling thousands of dollars. There were payments to an exclusive spa and wellness retreat. My retirement stipend, the money Ethan had so nobly dedicated to his hero father, was being used to fund Claire's life of obscene luxury. My sacrifice, my name, my story. It had all been laundered, passed through a ghost company, and used to buy handbags and massages. They hadn't just stolen my dignity, they had been spending it. Suddenly, I heard the faint sound of a car on the gravel driveway. Panic seized me. Claire. I quickly slid the folder back, exactly where I'd found it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I straightened the stack of files, my eyes darting around the room to make sure nothing was out of place. I took one last photo of the folder's label before slipping my phone back into my pocket. I walked out of the office, closing the door softly behind me, and forced myself to walk calmly toward the living room, my mind reeling. I had the smoking gun, but now I was trapped in the same house as the person who had pulled the trigger. The front door opened, and Claire swept in, carrying a collection of sleek shopping bags from stores whose names I didn't recognize. She stopped short when she saw me standing in the living room, a flicker of surprise or maybe annoyance crossing her face before being replaced by her usual mask of cool composure. "Frank," she said, her tone a little too bright, "I didn't realize you were still here. I thought Ethan's conference ran late." "He had an early start," I replied, my voice miraculously steady. I was just enjoying the quiet. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. In my pocket, the phone felt like a hot coal, heavy with the weight of the secrets it now held. "Well, don't let me disturb you," she said, gliding past me toward the kitchen. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. We were two actors in a play, both aware that the other knew the script was a lie, but neither willing to drop character just yet. The quiet of the house was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. I sat in one of the impossibly white armchairs, waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for her to leave, for Ethan to come home, for the courage to detonate the bomb I was carrying. Ethan arrived an hour later, looking tired but pleased with himself. He tossed his briefcase onto a chair and loosened his tie. "Huge day, huge," he announced to no one in particular. When he saw me sitting with Claire in the living room, he smiled. "Hey, Dad, see? Told you we'd take care of you. Better than some dusty old firehouse, huh?" That was it. The casual, condescending remark was the spark that lit the fuse. The time for quiet observation was over. I stood up slowly, the joints in my knees protesting. I took my phone out of my pocket. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room, and the practiced smiles on their faces faltered. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing with feigned concern. I didn't answer him directly. I walked over to the gleaming marble coffee table that sat between us, a sterile slab of polished stone. I unlocked my phone and swiped to the first picture I had taken in his office. It was the financial statement, the name Vance Holdings, LLC, clear at the top. I placed the phone on the table. "I have a question about your family's expenses," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble. Claire's face went rigid. Ethan leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "What is this? Dad, have you been going through my office?" "I went looking for the truth," I said, swiping to the next photo. It showed the line item, the $10,000 wire transfer, coded FM support. "You told me you set up a trust for my benefit. You told me it was for tax efficiency. You stood on a stage and told hundreds of people that this money was to honor my sacrifice." I swiped again. The next photo showed the outgoing payments. "It seems my retirement stipend has been very busy. It's been paying for a Porsche, for clothes I can't even pronounce, for spa days." Each word was a measured blow. I looked directly at Claire. "Your maiden name is Vance, isn't it?" The room was utterly silent. The color drained from Ethan's face. He looked from the phone to Claire, and then to me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish pulled from water. He looked trapped, utterly defeated by the stark, undeniable proof. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy I once knew in his eyes, a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, with no plausible lie to fall back on. He crumbled. "Claire, he stammered. "Dad, we can explain." But Claire didn't crumble. She rose to her feet, her posture radiating an icy fury. The mask was gone, and what lay beneath was terrifying in its intensity. "Explain what?" she snapped, her voice low and dangerous. "Explain that you came into our home under false pretenses and violated our privacy, that you're a bitter, confused old man who's making wild accusations because you're jealous of your son's success." She turned on me, her eyes blazing. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Those are legitimate business expenses. You're getting confused in your old age, Frank. It's sad, really. I am not confused. I shot back, my own voice finally rising, the dam of my composure breaking. I am not senile. I know what I saw, and it is theft. You watch your tone, she hissed, taking a step toward me. You keep this up, and I will do more than just suggest you have memory problems. I will get doctors. I will get a judge. I will have you declared legally incompetent to manage your own affairs. We will become your guardians, and then this entire, pathetic little rebellion of yours will be over. Do you understand me? The threat was no longer veiled in silk. It was a naked blade, and she was holding it to my throat. I looked at my son, who stood frozen, his face pale with sweat, saying nothing to defend me, nothing to stop his wife. He was a ghost in his own home, a willing spectator to my execution. And in that horrifying moment of silence, I understood. This was not a family I needed to salvage. This was a battle I had to win. I picked up my phone from the table, my hand steady once more. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice dropping back to a low, cold calm, and you've just made me understand exactly what I have to do next. I turned my back on both of them and walked out the front door, leaving the silence, the threats, and the wreckage of my son's character behind me in that cold, white room. I didn't go to a hotel. I went straight to the Austin airport, my mind a maelstrom of anger, hurt, and a strange, liberating clarity. Claire's threat to have me declared incompetent wasn't just a cruel outburst. It was a strategy. It was their endgame. They wouldn't just discredit me, they would erase me, locking me inside a legal cage where my words would mean nothing. They had left me no room for a quiet, private resolution. They had shown me that the only way to protect myself was to take the one thing they valued most, their public image, and hold it hostage to the truth. I booked the first red-eye flight back to Baltimore. As I sat at the gate, the airport's sterile brightness, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me, I pulled out my phone. My hands were still buzzing with adrenaline. I wasn't a writer, I wasn't a tech guy who knew how to make things go viral. I was just a man with a story that demanded to be told. I opened a simple, free blogging website and, without overthinking it, typed a name into the header, The Fireman's Ledger. I began to write. I didn't use their names. I didn't use words like son or daughter-in-law. I wanted the story to stand on its own, stripped of personal melodrama, and presented as a simple, undeniable set of facts. I wrote about a retired public servant who was honored at a lavish gala. I wrote about the generous stipend he was said to receive. Then, I wrote about his reality, the leaking pipes he fixed for others while his own went untended, the worn-out truck that was his only transportation, the overdue bills that were his constant companions. I described, with the cold precision of an incident report, the existence of a shell company registered under a maiden name. I described a luxury property bought with cash. I described financial statements that coded personal luxuries as support for an aging father. I laid out the timeline, the numbers, and the chilling conversation where a man's cognitive health was threatened as a tool of suppression. I didn't write with anger. I wrote with the clear, methodical calm of a man documenting the mechanics of a fire. This is where it started, this is the fuel it used, and this is how it spread. I ended the post with a simple question. What does a person do when the people meant to be their safety net are the ones setting the fire? I hit publish and shut my phone off. A sense of profound, terrifying peace settled over me. I had finally spoken. I had taken the narrative out of their control. Whatever happened next, the silence was broken. By the time I landed in Baltimore, the sun was just beginning to streak the gray sky with pink. I turned my phone back on, and it buzzed uncontrollably in my hand. Dozens of notifications. My post had been shared. First, by a few of my old firefighter buddies who had seen the link on my social media page. Then, someone in a Baltimore community group had shared it. From there, it had somehow jumped to an online forum for Austin tech gossip. The comments were a flood. Some were skeptical, but most were not. People wrote about their own experiences, an aunt whose nephew managed her inheritance into his own pocket, a father whose successful daughter used his name for a charitable foundation he never saw a dime from. My story, it turned out, wasn't just my story. It was a pattern, a quiet, shameful secret lived by countless others. I had given it a voice, and now that voice was echoing. A few days later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was one word, courage. I opened it. It was from Elena, the housekeeper. She told me she had seen my post. She said that after I had left their house, she had overheard a terrible argument between Ethan and Claire, accusations, blame, and Claire's cold dismissal that I was just an old man who could be managed. Elena wrote that she could no longer work in a house where cruelty was considered a management strategy. She had quit that morning. And at the bottom of the email, she wrote a sentence that made my breath catch in my chest. I gave a copy of your blog post and my letter of resignation to the lawyer Sarah Jenkins recommended. I will tell them what I know to be true. Tears welled in my eyes. The seed I had planted with a few kind words had grown into an act of profound bravery. Claire had underestimated me, but she had also underestimated the quiet, observant woman who cleaned her perfect, sterile house. She had mistaken a servant for a slave. Elena's email was more than just a morale boost. It was a game changer. She was a witness who had been inside the machine and could testify to the cold, hard mechanics of their deceit. The public ledger I had created was now backed by a human one. The fire was spreading, and it was moving far beyond the walls of their control. The world, it turns out, moves much faster when it has a story to chew on. My quiet little blog, The Fireman's Ledger, had become a small phenomenon. It was no longer just a personal account, it was a rallying point. People started using the hashtag number, The Fireman's Ledger, sharing my posts alongside their own harrowing tales of financial manipulation within their families. The chorus of voices grew from a whisper to a roar, and it was a roar that the media could not ignore. It started with a call from a young, sharp, investigative reporter from a major Texas newspaper. Her name was Maya Singh, and she told me she'd been following the online chatter. But what really caught her attention was the sheer number of people corroborating the pattern of my story. She had already done some digging of her own and had independently verified the existence of Vance Holdings and its connection to the Austin condo. She'd also received an anonymous tip I suspected from one of Sarah's legal contacts about Elena's resignation. She wasn't interested in gossip, she was interested in the mechanics of the fraud. I agreed to speak with her, with my new lawyer, Maria Flores, present for every word. We didn't give her the photos from my phone. Maria insisted we hold those for the authorities, but I walked her through the timeline, the gala, the threats, and the documents I'd found in the public record. 2 days later, a front-page article appeared under the headline, Austin Tech Mogul's Philanthropic Image Under Fire Amid Allegations of Elder Financial Abuse. It was a meticulously researched piece, laying out the facts without sensationalism. It didn't have to be sensational. The truth was damning enough. The article mentioned an LLC under Claire's maiden name and the existence of a corroborating witness. The story was no longer just a rumor on the internet. It was a credible, documented scandal. That article was the stone that started the avalanche. The story was picked up by national news outlets. Commentators on financial news channels began dissecting the family trust tax efficiency angle Ethan had tried to sell me, labeling it a classic shell game. The public pressure was immense, but the real damage was happening behind the scenes. Maria Flores, armed with Elena's sworn statement and my evidence, filed a formal complaint with the state's Adult Protective Services and, more importantly, sent a thick, detailed package to the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division. The lie about a $10,000 monthly stipend wasn't just a family matter. It was a potential $120,000 a year tax fraud. The fallout was swift and brutal. I heard through Sarah that investors in Ethan's latest funding round were getting cold feet. The board of a major charity Claire sat on called an emergency meeting and quietly removed her name from their website the next day. The beautiful, perfect world they had built on a foundation of lies was beginning to fracture under the weight of the truth. But the most satisfying, and in a way, the most tragic, part of the unraveling was what happened between them. Elena, in a follow-up call with my lawyer, described the final days before she quit. The house, she said, was no longer a silent, sterile showroom. It had become a war zone. She'd heard them shouting behind the closed doors of the office. Ethan, panicked and cornered, accused Claire of being too greedy, too reckless. "This was your system," he'd yelled, his voice thin with desperation. "You were the one with the maiden name LLCs." Claire, in turn, was merciless. Elena heard her fire back, her voice like ice. "My system was working perfectly until your sentimental, bumbling father decided to play detective. I built you an empire, and you couldn't even manage your own family. You are weak, Ethan. And now your weakness is going to drag us both down." Their partnership, forged in ambition and greed, had no foundation of loyalty to fall back on. When the pressure mounted, they didn't circle the wagons. They turned on each other, each looking for someone else to blame. The power couple, the toast of the Austin tech scene, was devouring itself in a fire of its own making. They had built their gilded cage and locked the door, but they had forgotten that when the fire comes, there's no way out. I felt no joy in hearing about their misery, but I felt a profound sense of rightness, of an equation finally balancing itself. They were finally reaping the harvest they had so carefully and so cruelly sown. The legal battle was long and ugly, just as Maria Flores had warned it would be. Ethan and Claire's lawyers tried to paint me as a vindictive, senile old man, but they couldn't argue with the paper trail. The ledger I had started on my kitchen table had grown into a mountain of evidence: bank statements, corporate filings, sworn testimony from Elena, and a damning forensic audit from the IRS. The jury was out for less than a day. The verdict was guilty, on all counts: fraud, elder financial abuse, conspiracy. The judge, a stern woman who had listened to the entire story with unwavering attention, spoke at length during sentencing about the corrosive nature of lies dressed up as family care. Ethan was given a substantial prison sentence. His weakness was not an excuse. Claire, as the architect of the scheme, received an even longer one. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. The justice wasn't in watching them fall. It was in the simple, quiet fact that the truth had finally been entered into the public record. The restitution, when it finally came, was a number that felt more like a clerical error than a reality. It was enough to change a life. But I found, to my surprise, that my life didn't need much changing. I bought a small, new construction row house in a quiet part of Baltimore, one with good plumbing and a small patch of grass out back. I sold the old Ford and bought a reliable, comfortable sedan that didn't complain when I turned on the heat, but the rest of the money, it didn't feel like mine. It felt like a responsibility. A few months later, I walked into my old community center, the same one where the firefighters union used to hold its meetings. I sat down with the director and we drew up a plan. We used the bulk of the funds to establish a new permanent program, the Miller Grant for Senior Advocacy. It provides pro bono legal aid and financial literacy counseling for elderly residents facing housing insecurity or potential financial abuse. The final scene of this long chapter of my life didn't take place in a courtroom or a fancy gala. It took place on a Tuesday afternoon in the fluorescent-lit basement of that community center. I stood in front of a small group of a dozen seniors, their faces etched with the same quiet worries I had once carried alone. I wasn't giving a speech. I was teaching a class. On the table in front of me wasn't a fancy legal binder, but a simple bank statement. "You have a right to see this," I said, my voice clear and steady. "You have a right to ask questions. Your name, your story, belongs to you. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." As I looked out at the faces of my neighbors, people who had lived lives of quiet dignity and hard work, I felt a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. The hot, destructive fire of my son's betrayal had finally burned itself out, but in its place, a different kind of fire had been kindled within me. Not a fire that consumes, but one that warms. One that sheds light, a pilot light of purpose, there to guide others out of the smoke. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I would spend the rest of my days making sure that flame never went out.